better sense than to believe that Nina Simone must have known about today's lectionary text about the young, gifted, and called Samuel. So God, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. I have a couple of questions, as I typically do, to ask. What comes to mind when you hear the word rare? Well, some folks might like to eat a rare steak, half cooked, and declare it to be good. Some folks understand the word rare to mean unusually good or remarkable. Hence, they like to eat the steak rare. Some folk understand the adjective rare to mean not occurring as often, like a genetic disorder, or like the little boys holding the door open for me at Marcus Theater the other day when I went to go see Beekeepers. It touched my heart so much, I gave them a tip, of course, and some advice, and you could hear the excitement in their voices when the three of them said to me, now we can have some popcorn, like having popcorn was rare in those days. Others might like to use the adjective rare like this: not found in large numbers, or as a high value like diamonds, or this crazy pink and red Stanley Cup craze that makes no sense. People are spending hundreds of dollars for a drinking cup. What intrigues me about today's Old Testament text is that it starts out by saying these words. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. Can I teach? I offer to you today that the word of the Lord was rare does not mean not there. Just perhaps folks found it difficult to obtain or even access to it, much like today, because of its truth-revealing epiphany and prophetic power. The word of the Lord was rare in those days because the prophets and leaders in antiquity were speaking truth to power, and folks didn't want to hear it. And the call to speak a truth-telling, gut-punching word of the Lord to folks will get you isolated or worse yet, killed. Moses told the folks to follow the laws, including remembering God who brought you out of Egypt. Amos spoke out against the elite and wealthy group of women leaders of Samaria, calling them cows of Bashan because they supported the insatiability of their husband's greed and then would be fatted up to be slaughtered in the captivity and greed and power of their husbands they supported. Yes, beloved, sometimes women vote and support things that are against their own best interests. And Jesus speaks out against the empire and the religious leaders who were connected to the evil seduction of political power and corruption of dehumanizing God's creation. And so, beloved, the word of the Lord was rare in those days, and it is rare today. What I have come to realize is this: it is easy to talk about somebody else. Oh, yes, it is. It is easy to talk about other nations. But when it comes to examining the hypocrisy, systemic oppression, racism, voter suppression, lies, and deceit, then we experience the rare, the truth-revealing power of the word of the Lord. And so here's a little background information. Hannah, Samuel's mother, made this vow: O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel. So she said, I have asked him of God. She brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young, and he was gifted, and I know he was black. And she brought the child to Eli. And she said, Oh Lord, my God, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to you for the child I prayed for. And God has granted me the petition that I made to God. Therefore, I have loaned him to God as long as he lives, and he is given to God. And they worship the Lord there. Beloved, the sacrifices of mothers, especially black mothers, is soothed with the promises of God. And sometimes parents have to understand that your child is on loan, and you have to ensure that the gift is used for the purposes of God. So don't hold on too tight. Your child has work to do, and speak into the life that they are young, they are gifted, and they are called to the honor and glory of God. And so it was not the best of times, nor was it the worst of times for Hebrews during Samuel's youth. Unlike today, nobody was shooting down the Houthis. Hamas and the Israeli leaders were not fighting. No gunman stormed a live TV broadcast in Ecuador. Ukraine and Russia were not going at it. The Democrats and Republicans were not playing games with partisan politics. Black women in higher education were not being bullied. And so in Samuel's youth, there were no wars going on, no threats for hostile neighbors, although the Philistines were always near. The nations were not united, but looked a lot like the disjointed 13 original colonies. The First Amendment was not yet in place for the rare freedom guarantees of religion, expression, assembly, petition, and even protest. As a matter of fact, seems like the theocratic faith that had sustained the people through centuries of enslavement in and the exodus from Egypt, a generation of wilderness wandering, and finally settlement in the promised land flowing with milk and honey, was now reduced, Lord have mercy, to routine, and the sacred has become profane, and for some, pious imposters, and in the words of my brother Ron, charlatans who were corrupt, pimping the people and playing God with pretending the blessings come when you render to Caesar, attending the Diddy and Epstein parties, making the world of the Lord rare. And as the text has it, the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. Sounds painfully familiar, doesn't it? And now we find the boy Samuel serving the Lord under his mentor Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The realities of Eli's chronicity and finitude had crept in, maybe cataracts or glaucoma, but even so, the lamp of God had not yet gone out on Eli's life, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel, and Samuel said, Here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But Eli said, I didn't call you. Lie down again. So Samuel went and lay down, and the Lord called again, Samuel. Samuel got up and went to Eli again and said, Here I am, for you called me. But Eli said, I did not call you, my son. Go lie down. Now, Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed. Many are called, but few are chosen. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy Samuel. Beloved, sometimes the elders have to step up to the plate to help young people understand that they are indeed young, gifted, and called by God. Listen, there is no Ruth without Naomi, no Timothy without Paul, no Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. without Ella Baker, Bayard Rustin, or Roy Wilkins. And now Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if God calls you, you say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something that will make both ears of anyone who hears tingle. On that day, I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from the beginning of end, for I have told him that I'm about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew because of his sons that were blaspheming God, and Eli didn't restrain them. Therefore, I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever. Samuel lay there until morning. Then he opened up the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel was afraid to tell Eli the vision. Sometimes our young people are afraid to speak up because the big bad elders are holding on to too much power. But Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." He said, "Here I am." Eli said, "What was it that God told you? Don't hide it from me. May God do so to you or more if you hide anything from me of all that he told you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from Eli. Then Samuel said, "It is the Lord, let him do what is seen good." As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. Beloved, don't miss it. The young boy who met God in the sanctuary responded to the divine call, now becomes a trustworthy prophet of God. Samuel not only heard, but Samuel listened. Beloved, are you ready to hear the voice of God? You might hear something that you don't want to hear. Samuel heard something that was not warm or fuzzy. He heard a word of severe judgment against his mentor. Can I tell you a secret? When we answer God's call, we might just hear something we don't want to hear, and you might just be called to do something you don't want to do, and with people that you don't want to be around. Answering God's call can leave you very upset, disturbed, scared, and even wondering, why me? But let me say here that God not only sees your potential, but God placed that potential of greatness there for you for the purposes of God. It is up to us to realize that God created each of us for God's purpose. God can see in you what the world can't see. In fact, God can see in you what you can't even see. Sometimes we end up settling for less than the best, and our lives become a huge mess, and we begin to second guess our choices. And sometimes we are all so unsure and insecure in our worthiness that we allow others to treat us any old kind of way. Insecure and unsure of the greatness and the grace that God has for us. Lord, have mercy. You know why? Because God created each of us in God's image, and we're all all worthy. When God calls you for God's purpose, young or old, you are able to put down the crutches of crotchiness and replace that bad attitude with gratitude. You're able to put down the cane of contention and able to sing praises unto the Lord. You stop making excuses and find time to serve the Lord with gladness when God calls you. It doesn't matter what church you are in or even if you go to church. It doesn't matter if the world says you ain't nothing and wonders can anything good come from you, because all you've ever been was lower than low from that place of wretchedness. But I don't know about you. I am so glad that God doesn't discriminate or eliminate. God doesn't choose folks based on ethnicity, geography, race, gender, or even economics. Lest we forget, just a few years ago, decades after the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King articulated his dream, we all witnessed God's power in action, because I know there are folks who still are not convinced and still wonder if anything good could come from a black man as president. And folks are witnessing the shifting, and some folks are so scared because the demographics are changing, and folks are so scared to relinquish that power. Eli had a whole lot of power, but God shut him down and raised up a whole new generation. That something good is happening only by the grace of God, even when there's evil present on every hand. But I just want to remind somebody today that when God calls you, no one has to tell you what to do. You share your faith. You preach on when it ain't nobody there but the rocks crying out. You sing till the power of the Lord comes down, because it's all for the glory of God. You work in the kingdom because God has given you hands, a mouth, and feet, and a serving heart to tell a dying world that although the word of the Lord is rare and visions are not widespread, God is never silent. God continues not only to call, but equip with grace, mercy, love, compassion, peace, and joy. So answer the call, tell the truth, shame the devil, and serve the Lord with gladness, because another generation will benefit from your call to selfless service. And by all means, hold the door open for somebody, because you might just get advice and a tip to even get enough to give you some popcorn to sustain the theater of your life. Whatever stage of life you might be on, God is still calling. God is not silent, even when the word of the Lord is rare. Unmute yourself today. Believe that God has called